The caretakers burden the twin sons of Kepler 442b, cast their merciless gaze across the rust-colored wasteland as Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his weathered face. At 58, he had never imagined he would be playing father to 5 orphaned children on a planet that seemed determined to kill everything that dared to live on its surface. The settlement of Haven's Rest stretched out before him, a collection of prefabricated domes and solar collectors that looked painfully small against the endless desert horizon. "Uncle Marcus," Elena's voice carried across the compound, urgent but not panicked. At 12, she had learned to distinguish between true emergencies and the daily struggles that had become their normal life. Her dark hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes bore the careful patches that marked all their belongings as precious and irreplaceable. Marcus turned from his inspection of the water reclamation unit, noting the concerning vibration in the third filtration stage, another problem to add to his growing list. The mining disaster that had claimed the children's parents 3 years ago had also destroyed most of the settlement's backup equipment. Since then, Marcus had been performing daily miracles with spare parts and determination. "What is it, Elena?" He called back, already walking toward the main habitat dome where the children spent their mornings in what passed for education on this forsaken world. "It's the power regulator again," she said, falling into step beside him. Elena had become his unofficial assistant, absorbing technical knowledge with a hunger that reminded Marcus of his younger self. The readings are fluctuating, and Kai thinks he heard something from the canyon. Marcus frowned. The canyon lay 2 kilometers east of the settlement, carved deep into the planet's crust by ancient geological forces. More importantly, it was where the Sentinel rested. The massive alien vessel had been dormant for as long as anyone could remember, half buried in the canyon walls like a sleeping giant. The original colonists had studied it briefly before the mining operations consumed their attention, but official policy now classified it as an archaeological curiosity, nothing more. They entered the habitat dome to find the other children clustered around Kai, who was holding an old sensor array that Marcus had given him to practice with. The 10-year-old's eyes were bright with excitement, his black hair falling into his face as he gestured animatedly. "Uncle Marcus, listen to this." Kai thrust the device toward him. Through the static and interference, Marcus could indeed hear something, a low rhythmic pulse that seemed almost like breathing. His engineering mind immediately began cataloging possible explanations: geological activity, electromagnetic interference, equipment malfunction, but deep in his gut, he felt something else entirely. Luna looked up from her drawing tablet, her 8-year-old face serious. "I've been having dreams about the ship," she said quietly. "It's trying to tell us something." "Ships don't dream, Luna," Jin corrected with the practical certainty of a 7-year-old. "They're just machines." Little Naya, barely 5, and still struggling with the concept that her parents weren't coming back, tugged on Marcus's work vest. "Is the ship sad like us?" she asked, her large brown eyes full of innocent concern. Marcus knelt down to meet her gaze, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. These children had lost everything, yet they still possessed the capacity for empathy that astounded him daily. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to find out." He stood and addressed the group, noting how they all turned to him with complete trust. The weight of their faith in him was sometimes overwhelming. "Elena, help me run a full diagnostic on our systems. Kai, I want you to monitor that signal and record any changes. Luna, keep drawing what you see in your dreams. Sometimes the mind notices patterns before the eyes do." Jin, check our water and food supplies. Naya, you're in charge of making sure everyone takes their vitamin supplements. The children dispersed to their tasks with the efficient cooperation that had become second nature in their small community. Marcus watched them go, pride and worry warring in his chest. They were growing up too fast, forced to shoulder responsibilities that should have belonged to adults. Yet they did so without complaint, finding joy in small victories and supporting each other through the daily hardships. As the morning progressed, Marcus threw himself into the maintenance routine that kept their tiny outposts functioning. The atmospheric processor needed new filters. The solar array had accumulated another layer of dust that reduced efficiency by 12%, and the communication array was showing signs of the intermittent failures that had plagued it for months. Each repair was a temporary solution, a patch on a system that was slowly but inevitably failing. The thought that haunted him most was what would happen when he could no longer maintain their life support systems. The relief ship from Earth was 18 months overdue, and their supply drops had dwindled to nothing. At the current rate of equipment failure, they had perhaps 6 months before something critical broke beyond his ability to repair. Around midday, Kai came running with his sensor array, practically vibrating with excitement. "Uncle Marcus, the signal's getting stronger, and there's a pattern. Look." He thrust a data pad toward Marcus, showing wavelength analysis that would have impressed a university professor. Marcus studied the readings, his trained eye picking out the subtle variations that Kai had identified. There was, indeed, a pattern, complex and definitely artificial. More concerning was the signal's increasing strength. Whatever was generating, it was becoming more active. "Alina," he called out, "grab the emergency packs. We're going to take a look at the Sentinel." "Are we allowed to do that?" Jin asked, ever the rule follower, despite their circumstances. Marcus considered the question seriously. Colonial regulations technically forbade unauthorized access to xenoarchaeological sites, but colonial regulations also promised regular supply runs, functional equipment, and adequate support for settlement operations. At some point, survival trumped bureaucracy. "We're the only ones here to enforce regulations," he said finally, "and we need to understand what's happening." The trek to the canyon took an hour across the broken terrain. Marcus had fashioned a simple cart to carry their equipment and ensure that little Naya could keep up without exhausting herself. The children chattered excitedly as they walked, speculating about what they might find, their natural curiosity undiminished by the harsh realities of their existence. As they crested the final ridge, the Sentinel came into view, and Marcus felt his breath catch. The ship was enormous, easily 300 meters long and built with flowing curves that seemed to incorporate the canyon walls themselves. Its hull was a dark material that seemed to absorb light, making it difficult to determine where the ship ended and the natural rock began. But most striking were the patterns of light that now pulsed along its surface, following channels carved into the hull like veins carrying luminous blood. "It's beautiful," Luna whispered, pulling out her drawing tablet to capture the scene. "It's impossible," Marcus muttered, his engineer's mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Dead ships didn't spontaneously reactivate after centuries of dormancy, yet the evidence was undeniable. As they approached the vessel, Kai's sensor array began registering energy signatures that made no sense according to human understanding of physics. The readings suggested power generation on a scale that dwarfed their entire settlement, yet there was no evidence of conventional propulsion or power systems. "Uncle Marcus," Elena said quietly, pointing toward what appeared to be an opening. In the ship's hull, that wasn't there before, was it? Marcus studied the aperture, clearly remembering the smooth, unbroken surface from previous visits. The opening was roughly rectangular, sized perfectly for human access, and lined with the same pulsing lights that decorated the hull. "It's like it's inviting us in," Naya said, with the simple directness that only children possessed. Before Marcus could respond, a sound emerged from the ship, not the mechanical noise of awakening systems, but something that seemed almost organic, a gentle tone that rose and fell like a greeting, or perhaps a question. Kai's sensor array went wild, displaying readings that shifted too rapidly to track. "It knows we're here," he said, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear. Marcus felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. Every instinct born of decades in space told him to retreat, to report their findings to proper authorities, to follow established protocols for first contact situations. But proper authorities were light years away. Protocols were written by people who had never faced starvation on an alien world. And the 5 children looking up at him with trust and excitement needed him to make a choice that might determine their survival. The ship pulsed again, the lights brightening in what seemed like encouragement. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Marcus could almost hear Elena's voice from years ago, asking him about the difference between being careful and being cowardly. At the time, he had given her a textbook answer about risk assessment and proper procedures. Now, faced with an impossible situation on an impossible world, he realized that sometimes courage meant stepping into the unknown. "Stay close to me," he told the children, shouldering his equipment pack. "And remember, we're explorers now. Whatever we find in there, we face it together." As they approached the opening, the ship's greeting tone grew warmer, more welcoming. The lights along the hull pulsed in rhythm with their footsteps, as if the vessel itself was excited by their presence. Marcus reached the threshold and paused, looking back at the 5 faces that had become his world. They nodded their encouragement, ready to follow him into whatever lay ahead. Together, they stepped into the alien ship, and the lights welcomed them home. The awakening choice, the interior of the Sentinel, defied every expectation. Marcus had formed during his decades of working with human spacecraft. Instead of the harsh angles and utilitarian design that characterized human engineering, the ship's passages curved like living arteries, their walls smooth and warm to the touch. The same pulsing lights that decorated the exterior continued inside, creating an almost organic rhythm that seemed to synchronize with their heartbeats. "It's like being inside a living thing," Elena whispered, her voice filled with awe rather than fear. Her hand trailed along the wall, and the lights responded to her touch, brightening and shifting in color from cool blue to warm amber. Kai was practically bouncing with excitement, his sensor array recording readings that would have been dismissed as impossible by any human scientist. "Uncle Marcus, look at these energy patterns. They're not following any known physics principles, but they're so elegant. It's like the ship is thinking." Marcus found himself nodding, though the logical part of his mind rebelled against the implications. The ship's design suggested technology, so advanced that it might as well be magic, yet there was an underlying harmony to it that spoke to his engineer's soul. Every curve and junction served multiple purposes, creating a synthesis of form and function that human designers could only dream of achieving. Luna had stopped walking and was staring at a section of the wall where the lights had arranged themselves into complex patterns. "It's trying to show us something," she said, pulling out her drawing tablet. Her young fingers moved quickly, capturing the shifting designs with an artist's eye for detail. As they moved deeper into the ship, the passages began to widen, leading them toward what could only be the vessel's central core. The space that opened before them took Marcus's breath away. They stood in a vast chamber that seemed to exist on a scale that defied the ship's external dimensions. The ceiling arched high above them, displaying what appeared to be a real-time view of the space around Kepler-4 for to be, complete with the planets, twin suns, and the distant stars that made up their local cluster. At the center of the chamber stood a structure that seemed to grow from the floor itself, its surface covered in the same flowing patterns that decorated the walls. As they approached, the patterns began to shift and coalesce, forming recognizable shapes and symbols. It's a control interface, Marcus realized, his engineer's instincts kicking in despite the alien nature of the technology. But it's not designed for human hands. Before he could stop her, Naya had stepped forward and placed her small palm against the central structure. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The entire chamber filled with a harmonious tone that seemed to resonate in their bones, and the patterns on the walls began moving with purpose and direction. Naya stepped back. Marcus called out, but the little girl was already backing away on her own, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's not scary, Uncle Marcus," she said with the certainty that only a 5-year-old could possess. "It's lonely. It's been waiting for someone to talk to." The chamber around them began to change. The walls displayed images that took Marcus a moment to recognize as the history of Kepler 442b. They watched as the planet transformed from a lush world with vast oceans to the desert wasteland they knew today. The images showed other beings, clearly non-human, who had lived on the world in its prime. The Sentinel had been their guardian, their protector, their partner in maintaining the delicate balance that kept their civilization thriving. "What happened to them?" Jin asked, his practical mind already working to understand the story unfolding around them. The images shifted, showing the gradual decline of the planet's environment, not through war or catastrophe, but through the slow accumulation of choices that prioritized short-term gains over long-term sustainability. The beings had recognized their mistake too late, and in their final years, they had programmed the Sentinel to wait for others who might prove more worthy of the planet's gifts. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. The ship hadn't just been dormant. It had been watching, waiting, evaluating every species that had come to Kepler-4 for to be since its creator's extinction. The human colonists had been tested and found wanting, their focus on extraction and exploitation marking them as a repetition of the mistakes that had doomed the planet's original inhabitants. But something had changed. The ship's attention had turned to their small group, and Marcus began to understand why. The images now showed scenes from their own lives over the past 3 years. Marcus working tirelessly to maintain their settlement, often going without sleep to ensure the children's safety. Alina taking on responsibilities far beyond her years to help care for the younger ones. Kai's boundless curiosity and desire to understand rather than exploit. Luna's artistic vision that found beauty in the harsh world around them. Jin's practical wisdom that helped them make difficult decisions. And Naya's simple, pure empathy that extended even to an alien intelligence. The ship had found what it was looking for, not conquerors or exploiters, but caretakers. Guardians who would put the welfare of others before their own, who would nurture rather than consume, who would ask what they could give rather than what they could take. A new tone filled the chamber, deeper and more complex than before. When it faded, Marcus found himself somehow understanding the ship's communication, not as words, but as direct concepts flowing into his mind. The Sentinel offered them a choice. It could remain dormant, allowing them to continue their struggle for survival with the inadequate resources they possessed, or it could awaken fully, sharing its technology and knowledge, but only if they accepted the responsibility that came with such power. They would become the planet's guardians, tasked with healing the damage done over the centuries and ensuring the future generations would inherit a world restored to its former glory. "It's asking us to take care of the whole planet," Alina said, her young voice heavy with the weight of understanding. "Not just ourselves, but everyone who might come after us." Marcus looked at the 5 children who had become his world, seeing in their faces the same determination that had kept them alive through 3 years of hardship. They had already proven their capacity for putting others first, for making sacrifices that benefited the group rather than the individual. But the decision wasn't theirs to make alone. Marcus knew that accepting the ship's offer would change everything about their lives. They would be committing not just themselves, but all future generations to a path of stewardship and responsibility. The power to heal a world was also the power to shape its destiny. "What do you think?" he asked the children, falling back on the democratic principles that had guided their small community from the beginning. Kai was the first to speak, his eyes bright with the possibilities he saw in the ship's technology. "We could fix everything, Uncle Marcus. Not just our settlement, but the whole planet. We could make it the way it was meant to be. But could we handle that much responsibility?" Jin asked, his practical nature asserting itself. "What if we make mistakes? What if we're not good enough?" Luna had been studying the images still flowing across the walls, her artist's eye picking up details that others might miss. "The ship doesn't think we're perfect," she said quietly. "It thinks we're willing to try. That's what makes the difference." Alina nodded, her natural leadership qualities evident even at 12. "We've been taking care of each other for 3 years. This is just bigger." All eyes turned to Naya, the youngest member of their group. The little girl was quiet for a long moment, her hand still resting on the control interface. Finally, she looked up at Marcus with the simple wisdom that only children possessed. "The ship is sad because its friends are gone," she said. "But it's not giving up. It's still trying to help, just like you helped us when our parents went away." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as he realized the parallel. Just as he had taken on the responsibility of caring for 5 orphaned children, the Sentinel was asking them to care for an orphaned world. The scale was different, but the principle was the same. Love in action, sacrifice for the greater good, hope in the face of impossible odds. Outside, the desert wind began to pick up, carrying with it the distinctive taste of one of Kepler-4 for 2B's devastating sandstorms. Through the ship's displays, Marcus could see the wall of dust approaching. Their settlement, a churning mass of destruction that would likely finish what 3 years of equipment failures had started. The choice crystallized in that moment. They could return to their settlement and hope to weather the storm with their failing life support systems, knowing that each crisis brought them closer to eventual extinction, or they could take the leap of faith that the ship offered, accepting both the power and the responsibility that came with it. Marcus looked at each of the children in turn, seeing in their faces the same determination that had kept them going through every hardship. They nodded back at him, a silent vote of confidence in whatever decision he made. "We accept," he said to the ship, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "We'll be the guardians you're looking for." The Sentinel's response was immediate and overwhelming. The chamber filled with light and sound and sensation as ancient systems awakened from their long slumber. Knowledge flowed into their minds, not as data to be learned, but as understanding to be integrated. They could see the planet as the ship saw it, wounded but not dead, capable of healing given time and proper care. Marcus felt the ship's systems connecting with his own understanding of engineering, showing him technologies that could restore the atmosphere, revitalize the soil, and create sustainable energy sources. Alina found herself understanding principles of biology and ecology that would guide the planet's restoration. Kai's natural curiosity bloomed into comprehension of physical laws he had never imagined. Luna's artistic vision expanded to encompass the aesthetic principles that guided the ship's creators in their work. Jin's practical wisdom was enhanced with knowledge of resource management and sustainable development. And Naya, the youngest, became the bridge between human emotion and alien intelligence. Her empathy translating concepts that defied conventional understanding. When the flow of knowledge finally ended, they stood changed, still themselves, but more than they had been. Before, the ship's displays showed their settlement, now protected by energy shields that would turn aside the approaching storm. The failing life support systems were already being supplemented by the Sentinel's technology, ensuring that their small outpost would survive long enough to become something greater. "What happens now?" Alina asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Marcus looked around at the 5 children who had trusted him with their lives, who had now trusted him with their futures. They had chosen to become something unprecedented in human history. The guardians of an alien world, the bridge between species, the hope for a future that neither humanity nor the Sentinel's creators could have imagined alone. "Now we get to work," he said, his voice filled with the quiet confidence that had sustained them through 3 years of hardship. "We have a planet to heal, a future to build, and a promise to keep." Outside, the storm raged harmlessly against the Sentinel's shields, while inside, 6 humans and 1 alien intelligence began the work of building a better world. The desert would bloom again, the oceans would return, and the stars would look down on a planet that had learned from its mistakes and chosen hope over despair. The ship had chosen well. Humanity had found its purpose among the stars, not as conquerors, but as gardeners, nurturing life wherever it took root. And in the end, that made all the difference.